In this video we're going to be looking at problem 4, which is called postcode formatter. Now this problem is the first one where there's really more than one way to solve the problem, and depending on how much previous programming knowledge you have and what you've picked up in the previous examples, you might try to solve this problem differently. So to that end, I'm going to show 2 ways to solve it. So starting off, basically we want to get 4 different parts of the postcode. The postcode starts with 2 letters and then a number, and then there should be a space, another number, and then 2 letters. So there's 4 parts of the postcode altogether, and the program wants us to enter the 4 parts of the postcode and then print it out properly formatted. So we're going to need 4 variables to store those 4 parts. Now, if I was working in or on a larger piece of software, I would not use a variable called part1, but for the sake of this example and to explain how the code's working, I think this will work quite well. You'd maybe want to use something like postcode part 1 or letters 1 or numbers 1 or whatever you want to call it that would make sense, but for my video I'm going to call it part 1. So part 1 equals, and it's just some letters we want them to type in, so it's just going to be a standard input so that we get a string. I'm going to say please enter the first letters. There we go. And then basically we're going to continue down this route. So part 2 is a number. But if you think about it, we don't need to store this number as an integer. We don't need to put int around the input because we're only going to display it out if we were doing a calculation, or if this postcode was maybe being used by the post office to sort mail that was going in certain directions, maybe. But for the scenario we've been given here, we're just asked to take some data and format it. I think it's perfectly fine to keep it as a string. So I'm not going to turn it into an integer even though we're typing in a number. So I'm going to say please enter the first number. And then we're going to repeat that for the second set of letters and the second number. Oh, I'm missing a quote there before we go any further. So I'm going to cheat a wee bit. I'm going to copy this line. I'm going to call this part 3, and I'm going to say please enter the second number, and then we'll have part 4 equals input please, a few mistakes here, please enter the second letters. We'll go with that. So far the program should basically just ask us to type in 4 pieces of data. So if I run it and try it out, and in the example it asks us to type in KY 8, that's the number, second number is 9, and the second letters are H and L. HL. There we go. Program's executed with no problems. So we seem to be getting all pieces of data in. And again, I'm just keeping them all as strings because it's a postcode and we're only formatting and displaying the data back. So this comes to the part where there's multiple ways to solve it. The one that requires the fewest lines of code would be just to print the data back. So we can use the print command. And we learned before that you can use a comma to separate pieces of data and put a space between them. So I could print part 1, comma, part 2, part 3, and part 4. And that should print them all out. But the problem comes from the commas. The commas automatically put a space in between each data item that you're printing out. So if I type in KY 8, 9, and then HL, it'll print it out, but it's got spaces between it. So we want to remove the space between the KY and the 8, and we want to remove the space between the 9 and the HL. So to do that, we need to use something called concatenation. Now that's a tricky word, but it's one worth remembering, and it's quite easy to put a flashcard to help you study for remembering the term. So concatenation, which is basically just joining strings. That's all it comes down to, really. So if we've got two strings, like part 1 and part 2, we want to join them together with no space in the middle. And the way we do concatenation is, instead of a comma, we can use a plus. So that will join part 1 and part 2 together. Almost like you're doing a sum. So if you add ky and 8, it's going to have ky 8. Then we'll use a comma to put a space. And then we can add together part 3 and 4. So in the print line, we're using a plus to join our two strings together. Now it only works with strings, it wouldn't work with an integer. We'd have to do something different there. A comma puts a space in between the two things we're printing. So it almost treats it like two separate items. This is one item, then we've got a comma, then we've got another item. So if I run that, we should have a working program. So ky 8, 9, and HL. There we go, it's came out properly. So that's the next step, the idea of doing concatenation. Now that's quite a messy print line, and it's a wee bit complicated. So the program's finished at this point, but I'm going to show you one more step you could take. Rather than just having an input section and an output section, you could put a process in the middle, and you could store the full postcode. So I could store full postcode, and to do that I could create a variable. So I could say postcode equals, and basically I could join all the strings together. So I could say part 1 plus part 2 plus, now this here's where it gets a wee bit tricky, because you would normally use a comma to put a space when you're printing something out, but we're not printing something here, we're just creating a variable when storing the data. So what I would need to do is I would need to add on a space. So we'd have part 1 plus part 2 plus a space in the middle, and I'm using quotes to show it's a space, plus part 3 plus part 4. And what I've done there is I've managed to basically take the complicated calculation and store it in a simple variable, so it's easier just to refer to it as postcode now. And now I can just change my print to postcode, and that would form the same action. So the first way I've done it is absolutely fine. This way is maybe a wee bit more complex because we're adding an extra line of code in here, but it allows me to store the full postcode as a variable, and I could reuse that later if I had to, or if I wanted to, rather than having to do the calculation each time. So I'll run that just to confirm it's working. ky 8, 9, and HL. And you see it's giving me the same result. So that was two different ways I solved this program, but it gave me the same result. And that's okay. There's not always a right or wrong way to solve a programming problem, and especially at the start when you're just learning things out. So either of those methods would be perfectly fine in this example. The main point is that you can use concatenation, which is joining strings together, and to do it you just use a plus. So plus in words would count as concatenation, which is joining strings.